Hello, everyone, and welcome to Debra and Peter Are Doing a Podcast with me, Peter Wanless, and her, Deborah Alcott-Tyler.
Yes, hello.
Hi, Deborah. When we last spoke, you were about to go off to a cricket match at the tournament, which we don't speak about in Somerset because we are completely disenfranchised in the West Country from that tournament, and our players are kind of scattered to be exploited by the rest of the country. But you were quite excited about it, and I think you're going with your mum, who's a big fan. So how was that?
She is a big fan. And in fact, she became a big fan. She's never really been that fussed about most sports, to be fair. She'll watch the occasional bit of golf. But what happened was when I had my hip replacement was the very first year they started the 100. And so we were at home the whole time. She'd come to help out because my partner had to go back to work. And we just ended up watching it. And she absolutely fell in love with it. And I just, on my life, every year since, she's watched every single game. Women's in the afternoons, men's in the evening. She'd be frequently ringing me up and say, did you just see that wicket? Or did you see that, hit for six or whatever? So she gets very excited about it. But she'd never been to a 100 match before. And so me and my partner decided to take her and my dad so she could actually experience it in real life. And it was really good fun. There was a very, very exciting men's game. The women's game was good, don't get me wrong, but the men's game was particularly exciting because the Oval Invincibles got off to a terrible start, and halfway through we were absolutely, almost like it's a bit boring because nothing's going to happen. And then they staged the most incredible comeback. I think they scored something like 101 runs off 27 balls or something. It was just phenomenal. So it was very exciting. But I wouldn't go again. And the reason I wouldn't go again is because there were 22,500 people in the ground. And it was noisy and it was crowded and there were queues for absolutely everything. And so that kind of put me off a bit. Plus, of course, although seeing a cricket match in real time is a very special thing, you actually don't see the same things that you see when you watch it on telly. And in fact, we came home that evening. We got home about 11:30 and then immediately went to where we'd recorded the match to see if we could see ourselves in the crowd, which we could. So it was great fun and I loved it. And I know you're not a fan, and neither is Stuart Evington, but the atmosphere was phenomenal. The kids, it was just great stuff.
Yeah. Well, I love live sport and I love cricket, and the 100 is it's a type of cricket. It's just that it's stolen our assets and represented them in a different format and thrown loads of money at the marketing to the point where it can't possibly fail. And in the meantime, Somerset have to play another competition against the 100 with what's essentially our second team. But our second team is really good, and we still get thousands of people who come to our games at Taunton. And in fact, we had one yesterday. Yesterday was the last day of my sort of moving house summer holiday period, I would say, before I need to knuckle down to do a bit of work on one or two things. And I'd actually said to Lady W, after yesterday, you must stop me from doing other things and faffing around and stewing the fruit and this sort of thing, because I do need to do a bit of work because I need to earn a bit of money to pay for this house, etc., etc. But then I realised that actually, because of the ridiculous scheduling of this second tournament, because the England Cricket Board only thinks about the 100 and doesn't think about the rest of us, that if we won our game yesterday, we would have a quarter-final game tomorrow, Thursday, and it could be anywhere in the country. And sure enough, we won our game yesterday, and so I rather sheepishly had to explain to Becky that although it was really important, I knuckled down to work actually on Thursday, and it's at home at Taunton again. How could I possibly be living less than 10 minutes from the ground and not doing my presidential duties on Thursday? And if we win that one again, we've then got another game on Sunday. So I shall be doing all my best flexible working efforts to work, really long days on the days when I'm not at the cricket. But there we go.
Well, listeners, you understand why Peter and I never talk about the 100. It presses all of his buttons. Anyway, but it was great fun, and you were in Brussels last week, Peter. How was that?
Yes, that was interesting. So that was with all the staff of Five Rights Foundation and me as a trustee, and me trying to be to contribute, but in a slightly semi-detached way, which I think worked well and was fun. And I saw you commenting again in the last few days about it's the trustees collectively who are responsible for charity, not the chair. And that motivated me this morning, rather than knuckling down to writing the report I'm supposed to write, to send a note to my other fellow trustees just to update them on the things which we were discussing and what we were doing. Because I did think, actually, there's a kind of collective responsibility here, isn't there? And if they don't get at least the sort of sense or an opportunity to know that I had spent that time with the staff and asked some questions about it, then that would be, arguably inappropriate in governance terms. So
that was exactly the right thing to do. No, and what's interesting, it's had massive traction. I think it's had more comments and reactions than practically anything else I've ever posted. Something like, well, it's well over 800 now, so it's obviously landed with people and they've recognised that this is a bit of an issue. But yeah, it is. It's like the amounts of times when I'm dealing with very traumatised chief executives and I say, well, have you kept the board informed? Well, no, it all goes through the chair. And I'm like, and when they say they've fallen out with the chair and they're about to lose their job, and I'm like, well, what does the board say? How's the chair consulted? And it's like, I don't know. It's all, like, So if you're listening, anybody, chief execs, whoever you are, for goodness sake, your boss is the board, not the chair. The chair facilitates the relationship and helps to guide and can give advice about how to share information, but they're not allowed to sit on information. Anyway. And
it doesn't come naturally. I mean, there are lots of temptations or opportunities to think as the chair that you're making everyone's life easier by taking a kind of collective responsibility for them individually. But you're quite right. So that's fine while it's working okay.
But even then it's not, because what you're doing is putting the rest of the board at risk.
Yeah.
And the trouble is the Charity Commission doesn't allow trustees to say, well, the chair didn't tell us about it, we didn't know. They don't get away with it because the Charity Commission will say, well, your duty as trustees is to find out what's going on. And if your chair wasn't giving you information, to find out why they're not giving you information. And, so you just don't get away with it. You can't hide from responsibility as a trustee, much as you might like to. So don't dump it. And also, loads of poor bloody chairs end up doing way more work than they need to do in terms of serving the charity, because they and the chief executive and the rest of the board behave as if it's their job, and it's not. They're the first among equals, basically. Anyway, I think we've got the message across there, haven't we? So
I think so.
Yeah. So actually, what I'm more excited, angry, exercised about is this business that's been reported, certainly in the media, in the sector media, and also I think in the national media, about the number of refugee and migrant charities who have had to write to the Charity Commission to ask to have their trustees' names removed from public view on the register. On the one hand, that goes against everything we believe about charities, which is about transparency. You need to know who's running the organisations, who's making the decisions, where they come. On the other hand, you don't want people put at risk. And in fact, Jose, our lovely podcast producer, wrote a very good post, which he posted today, which he'll put the link in to the post, about what it feels like to be a migrant in another country, and like coming and feeling hostile, and that if it happened to us, God forbid, that we were forced to flee our country, would we not want to be met with compassion, not hostility, and things like that? It's very powerful and such a worry. It's like, what the hell is going on that you can't even lead a charity that's helping people, whatever you think about those people, without having to, they're actually having to take measures to protect their staff. They're having to, those that have like badges and things like that, they're having to be taken off. It's just wrong.
They're being sort of physically and emotionally threatened.
Yes, absolutely. So obviously social media, there's a lot on social media. So a lot of trolling and very nasty, aggressive, racist stuff being set against them. And also there are, things like if they wear a lanyard that sort of says this is a refugee charity, that puts them at risk of abuse, if nothing else. So yeah, it's being, it's about half of, apparently I read, I think it was in The Guardian, about half of NGOs who support refugees and asylum seekers are being targeted, both physically, presence, like they're people are going to their offices or whatever, or they're getting emails or hate mails and things like that. It really is serious. That's the thing.
That is awful.
And the thing that makes me cross is I can't see that the Charity Commission is doing anything about it, particularly other than complying with the requests. And I also think the government is horribly responsible for some of its own rhetoric about refugees and asylum seekers. You know, it's like pandering to the worst side of human nature, and also like creating this sort of so the image in people's mind of a refugee is a fit, healthy young man who just wants to, you know, come and sponge off the state in the UK and rape our women. And that's absolutely the exact opposite. You know, nobody wants to really leave their home. People want the place they were born in to be safe and to be welcoming and to be somewhere they can work and bring up their families. And so if you're forced to flee and on your own, there's a bloody good reason for it. And also this thing about why, is they always bang on about it's the young men, it's the young men. But Peter, think about it. If Britain suddenly got invaded or taken over, we just had a really repressive regime in charge of us, you wouldn't send your your wife, your granddaughter, and your 13-year-old teenage daughter overseas. You'd send the men first. You'd send the young men who could survive the journey, who would be less likely to be attacked and assaulted and abused, to establish themselves somewhere so that they could then send for you safely. So it makes complete logical sense for it to be the young men. I mean, we would in our family, we'd send the young, healthy men over to find us a place to stay. And then when they found somewhere, we then all joined them. So people seem to lose like real common sense about this. Anyway, as you tell, I'm very upset about it.
Yeah. And this has gone beyond the people directly affected to be victimizing the people who are trying to help. I mean, it's hugely intolerant to be threatening and chastising people who are just trying to help people who are less fortunate than themselves. It's hard enough being a trustee, never mind having to take all of that as well.
All those precautions,
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking back to some sort of early days at the lottery, but it was never where there were popular and unpopular causes, and the lottery, we used to get into quite a lot of difficulty, nearly always with the Daily Mail, who were also the biggest kind of flag wavers and champions of the lottery fund when we were supporting veterans to go back to Normandy beaches and this sort of stuff. So there were things that they liked and things which they didn't like, but almost trying to make a virtue of supporting and funding the charities that were less likely to get their money from other places. But it does become a self-fulfilling prophecy if we all behave in a way that assumes that some causes are going to be popular and others aren't, which of course they will be. But where's the kind of tolerance and compassion and kindness?
Well, it's also, by all means, disagree. By all means, have a view about immigration. Like, that's not the issue. The issue is about violence and threats of retaliation and trolling and abuse. And, you can have a perfectly reasonable argument on social media. I mean, argument not in the sense of falling out, but argument putting a case forward on social media by laying out your case and listening to what other people have to say and what have you. I'm not saying everybody has to agree with me, which I think just let them all in, for God's sake, you know what I mean? But you don't have to turn to, and you sort of think, Jose makes a very good point in his article about how we talk about these people have got to integrate with the UK and they're changing our culture and they're not, they don't learn the language. And Jose makes a very good point because he comes from Spain, listeners, if you hadn't gathered by his name. But Jose makes a very good point that the British in Spain live in conclaves. They live in bloody ghettos. They don't learn the language. They don't integrate into local Spanish, society. There are English bloody pubs. Forgive my swearing, and also the point that we call people like Jose an immigrant because he's come to this country. Yeah. We call British people who've gone to live abroad, expats, which somehow seems much nicer. It's just the absolute hypocrisy. And the irony is, actually, as Jose pointed out, an awful lot of the very same people who live in these countries in an expat community and celebrate still trying to be as English as they possibly can be, are the very same people who are anti, what's going on in the UK and anti-immigration. It's just the irony just doesn't even bear think about it. They're also the same, ironically. The other thing, I shouldn't laugh because it's really unkind, but sometimes I am unkind, so deal with it, listeners. But it's the number of British people living in Spain who'd settled and retired in Spain who'd voted for Brexit and then got an absolutely horrible shock when they suddenly discovered that all the things that they'd been entitled to when we were part of the EU, they weren't anymore, and how many of them have been forced to sell their homes and come back to the UK because the healthcare system doesn't support them in the way it did when we were part of the EU. And there's part of you that says, well, it's your own bloody fault for not thinking sensibly. There you go. That's my unkind rant. There you're saying kindness and compassion. Some people I find it hard to feel compassion for.
We should move on, but one of the other things which struck me about that those days I spent in Brussels last week with the charity which I am chairing and has employees of all sorts of fascinatingly different nationalities, because it's a global charity, and is a UK registered charity, though we're also registered in Belgium now, and there's just slightly more staff in Brussels than any other place, so that was where we met. But we conducted, without batting an eyelid, all the conversations in this incredibly complicated and nuanced set of issues around children's rights online in English.
Yeah.
And it is incredible. And I'm thinking, she's German, she's Italian, she's French Canadian, he's, whatever. And their turns of phrase and their without missing a beat, they are super intelligent people engaging in our language, which is rather kind and considerate and compassionate of them, because I didn't for a minute think I was going to turn up and have to operate in a kind of bi or multilingual way. So we kind of got used to being pretty lazy, haven't we, as well, by assuming that English is the national language.
Although actually, in our defence, it's rare for me to defend us. I think we're guilty of more than we're not. But in our defence, part of our challenge is that everywhere in the world you go, people speak English. So if you're a Japanese person who wants to communicate with somebody in France, you speak English. It's become the common language between foreign nations. So I think of course, the reason for that is because of colonization, the fact that we imposed our language and our stuff on most of the world. But nonetheless, that's because so as someone who isn't British, it's obvious to know which should be the first language you learn. It's going to be English, because most people can converse a bit in English, whereas for us, where English is our first language, it's like, well, which language do we pick?
Yeah.
Is it Spanish? Is it Chinese? Is it Russian? Is it, so it's a much harder choice.
I didn't try very hard to speaking any other languages, though, and I've got too much fruit to pick and too many apple pies and crumbles to make to dedicate hours to Duolingo or whatever I need to do. But I did feel I was being quite lazy and complacent.
So talking of breaks, go on.
No, I was going to come to that as well.
Yeah.
So I tagged you in something which Lynn Perry, the wonderful chief executive of Barnardo's, posted on her return from holiday, and this week is that kind of first week back after the August bank holiday, isn't it, where you kind of look ahead and there's this great long haul through to Christmas, and much as I and many of the people that we know love their work, it's a kind of time of the year when you return, and as she said, you very often manage to switch off completely and get quite a different kind of vibe in your life, and remember that there are certain things which you can enjoy and derive pleasure from, which do get squeezed out, like my language learning gets squeezed out of my days. And she was doing this kind of call for advice on, what do you do as you get back into that relentless grind of work to remember that there's value in taking time to have balance and perspective. And she posted a picture of a beautiful sort of sunset to help remember to take a breath. But I am not the person to come to for advice on this. I do have some kind of thoughts, but they'll mostly be kind of do as I say, not as I do. What are your tips or advice on this one?
So talking more really from the perspective of people in a workplace, like chief executives, senior leaders, etc. That there are several things. Like often they don't switch off at all, and so even when they're on holiday, they're answering emails and things like that. Or when they come back to a massive pile of things. And I used to be that person, Peter, but I'm not anymore. And what changed me were three things, really. The first thing was ego, was realizing that it was my ego that was making me check emails. And, it's like, because I thought I was really important. Yeah. And so, the place couldn't function without me. They couldn't manage without me. So therefore I had to, make myself present. The second thing was arrogance. Like nobody can do any of my work. Nobody can do my job. Only I can do my job. And then the third thing was the introduction, which we've had now for years at DSC, of an acting in absence policy, which we may have spoken about before, I'm not sure. But we have a very, very clear policy at DSC, which no member of staff can disappear off without having somebody else to cover their work for them whilst they're away. And that has so many advantages. So, for example, when I go on leave, one of my directors will be acting chief executive, and they have all my powers. So they will respond to my emails. They'll deal with all my work. The only work I do that they can't do is my speeches, and that's usually because when I'm asked to deliver a speech, people have asked for me to deliver a speech, not just somebody from DSC. But often I can, get them to do that as well. And so what it means is that when I come back after holiday, most things have been dealt with, and only the things that they would think, oh, we really should leave that to Debra, comes back, is done. And it's the same all the way through the organisation. So when our head of marketing goes on leave, he has someone who acts in absence, who goes to leadership team meetings, who has power and authority, access to the inbox, and they're treated the same by us at the leadership level. So if an acting in absence comes to a meeting, they're treated exactly the same as they would be if they had that role permanently. And it's a transformational thing, because what basically happens is, firstly, everybody knows that they're going to get help when they're on leave. So they're very willing to step up and help other people. It's a brilliant development opportunity for people. So in an organisation like DSC, which is very small, there are very, very few promotion opportunities, but there is an opportunity to learn about what it means to be a senior leader, or to be a manager, or to carry out somebody else's task, but using this acting and absence system. And then the other thing I'd say is that, it's like we need to give ourselves a break as well. And what I mean by that is, pun intended, is that it's kind of okay to get lost in work sometimes. You're not a failure as a human being because you don't do yoga and sit outside and meditate every day, or gaze out into glorious sunsets. It's really okay to sometimes spend a lot of your time in the workplace, provided you're every once in a while reminding yourself of why you're doing what you do. I think there's far too much of this perfect chief executive, that perfect balance, never lets work interfere with home, never lets home interfere with work, I've got everything nailed, isn't like grasping to the end of the day, heading for the fridge for a glass of wine or a gin and tonic, it's like people are going off doing yoga or meditating or brisk walks in the sunshine. I'm like, yeah, right, now get real. So I think you should definitely, and anybody listening who's in that place, should give themselves a break. And you're human, and sometimes you do get absorbed in work, and it does matter.
I think I'm one of those people who's a kind of 100% all in or all out, but I do have more than one interest. So I sometimes sort of joke that if I'd spent as much time thinking about child protection as I had about Somerset Cricket Club, then I would have been a whole lot better at making progress with the NSPCC. But of course, it's not true, because if you do become utterly and completely obsessed and absorbed, and as Lynn says in her message, tired and worn out, you don't end up delivering what you need to deliver. So one way, if you're someone who is susceptible to overdoing and obsessing things, is have 2 or 3 or 4 obsessions and switch from one to the other, because even if you're running at 100 miles an hour, at least it's a different race from time to time.
And also you get a different perspective, don't you? Because we've talked before about, we've talked about cricket, and we've made analogies between cricket and leadership, and like all that kind of thing. So the other thing about having something different that you're interested in is it gives you a different perspective, which might give you insight into the other job that you do.
Yeah. And then another thing, that this isn't directly related to necessarily coming back from a holiday, but just in general. I worked, when I was in the Department of Education for a while, for someone called Peter Housden, who was a local authority chief executive, and he went on to become a permanent secretary in Whitehall and then up in Scotland. But he was one of these people who, whenever you bumped into him, he always had a smile, and he would either say to you, "How are you?" or you would say to him, "How are you?" and he always said, "I'm fine, I'm great." And there were times when I knew he wasn't fine at all. He was under extraordinary pressure, and this and that and the other was going on, but he would never ever let you know that, and he always had time for you. So even if you, and as this is where I say, do as I say, not as I do.
Yeah.
But even if you are feeling the kind of pressure of being pulled in all directions, there's a way of presenting yourself as present in the moment or attentive to the people around you that can help other people feel less kind of under pressure and constrained. And definitely, provided as leaders, we're amplifiers, aren't we?
Yeah. But provided we're not posing as the perfect person, the danger is in always smiling and being cheery, even in times of terrible stress, is that people start to think, A, that's what they've got to aspire to, so they don't feel they can talk about what's troubling them. Or B, they think that the leader has absolutely no idea what the problem is. You know, the whole thing's going to shit.
Being casual about that.
So I think there's something about being able to say, it's pretty stressful at the moment, isn't it? But we'll be all right. We can take the right actions. You know, I mean, we literally had that conversation only this morning at our leadership team meeting in DSD, because, you know, we've had some very, very tight months. And it always feels really stressful trying to make sure we're getting enough money coming in order we can keep on providing the services that we provide. True for many charities, of course. But we don't pretend that it isn't happening. So I don't say, it'll all be fine. You know, say, look, we've got some challenges, but here's some things we can do. And don't forget, we're working on ABC. And I think that's the way to handle it. I think you have more credibility if you acknowledge to your team, yes, we're having a pretty shitty time at the moment. However, you know, I reckon we can pull through if we do these following things.
Another thing that I was helped at over time was time management. And someone once describing, you know, a really bad diary looks like a barcode where you have, you know, 15 meetings one after another. And there are people who would never have time for me, even as a chief executive, because they didn't have a slot in their diary for the next 3 weeks because they had 10 meetings every day. And that is madness. And that's something that's within your control, especially as you get more senior in an organization. You can build in time, or you can have someone build in time for you. I remember a story once about, this is a really old story, about Dr. David Owen, who was the Labour Foreign Secretary. And there was great concern for him at one point, because he had in his diary these slots which said credit meeting. And the senior officials were concerned that he had problems with the bank and that he was running out of money or something, because about 3 times a week there were these kind of credit meetings, and they tried to work out how they could ask him about, you know, if everything was okay. But what it was his diary secretary crediting him with time within all these other meetings to think. So although his diary still looked like a barcode, some of the meetings weren't real meetings. They were, and you can do that by creating yourself meetings which are thinking time, and other people don't need to know what they're for. If you don't want, if you want people to look in your diary and think that you're really busy all the time, but why would you? You know, it's quite nice for people to know that there is time to think. Or again, it's easier when you are creating. You've got more opportunity to create time, but have meetings in different places, which give you travel time, which means that you kind of think and operate in different ways. And so the diary has variety rather than feeling relentless. And so one of the things for me at the moment now, coming back, I have got something really important which I need to write. It's hanging over me like an A-level essay or a kind of university dissertation. I know that I will get it done. I'm not one of those people who will stay up, you know, all night just before the deadline to finish it.
Yeah, me neither.
But if I have to, I will. There actually is enough time, and I will go to the cricket tomorrow, even if it rains, and that will compromise some of the other
the thing I do.
No.
Yeah, because I have. So, firstly, I think it's a lot easier as well in the virtual world in which I and most of my team live, because it's actually quite easy for me to juggle my time so I can talk to somebody if they need me. So even if I've got a relatively packed diary, I can very easily slip out of the meeting 10 minutes early, because all it is a question of, you know, coming out of that meeting and switching on to the next one. Whereas in person, more challenging to do that. But I think the other thing is about I make appointments to do stuff. So I do a monthly column for third sector, and in my diary I set aside, like, write third sector articles, set aside a couple of hours for it. The same for articles that I have to write, prep I've got to do for speeches and things like that. And I found for me, if I treat jobs that I've got to do that are to do with me on my own, writing something or producing something, if I make an appointment to do it, I'm so much more likely. So I see 10 o'clock, okay, right, I'll just buckle down, get on with it then. So I found that helpful to make appointments with myself.
And you can do that, can you? You can knuckle down at that time, because that's the risk to me. I create those times, and then once I know it's there, I sort of think, oh, I'll just go.
Most of the time I can do it. But the other thing, Peter, I'm sure I've talked to you before about glass balls and plastic balls.
Yeah, we did quite recently.
Well, let's remind listeners about the glass balls and the plastic balls. So we think we're spinning plates as people in charities because it's so busy, and that if any one of the plates drop, it's a disaster. But actually, we're not spinning plates, we're juggling balls. And I don't know where I got this from. I didn't invent it, it was somebody else. And I cannot for the life of me recall the source. So apologies if it's you listening. But some of the balls we're juggling are glass and some of them are plastic. And the plastic ones you can drop. The world does not come to an end if you drop the plastic ball, and you can pick it up again later. Whereas with the glass balls, obviously you've got to keep them going. And the trick is to identify which of all the stuff you've got in your diary, all the jobs you've got to do are the glass balls and which are the plastic ones.
Yeah.
And the thing is, when you do that, you find that very few of your balls are actually glass.
Mm.
There are some, but the vast majority are plastic. When you do later.
Yeah, when I have found, when faced, how much to stretch this metaphor, when faced with a glass ball that feels kind of all-consuming and has to be managed but can't necessarily be resolved immediately, but knowing there are lots of other things going on, I could never do justice to the other things that were going on. And I taught myself over time that it doesn't matter, even if you don't feel you're productively engaged with dealing with this urgent thing, if it's all consuming, let it consume that time, because if you try and do the other things, not only will you not do them very well, but you'll be and it will partly be because you're thinking about this other all-consuming thing, and you'll make a bit of progress with that, and then it'll feel a bit liberating. So, but in those moments, I would feel I'm being less productive than otherwise could be because I'm obsessing about this unresolved thing.
But it's also giving ourselves a break, Peter. As I said earlier, it's like nobody is 100% productive all the time. All of us, every single one of us, even the people we think are absolutely brilliant and seem to have it nailed, have off days and days when they get distracted and days when they're not concentrating properly, or days when they didn't do as good as a job as they could have done. I mean, I have those all the time when an article I've written is not as good as I would have liked it to be, or a speech I've given didn't go down the way I wanted to. We all have those things. And I think we need to forgive ourselves. I suppose is what I'm trying to say, coming back to Lynn's point about how do you keep yourself professional, that it's really okay to lose sight of that sometimes, provided it's not forever. I have a saying, you're allowed to wallow in self-pity, you're not allowed to drown in it. And I think you can apply that to, you're allowed to wallow in obsession or wallow in, being completely consumed by this thing. Just don't drown in it. And ask for help. Look for the life raft. Life raft?
Yeah.
What's that thing called? Life belt.
Life belt.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway.
Yeah, that's another half hour of our lives drifted down the river. Hopefully useful. I found it useful. Maybe one or two people are listening and they might find it useful or not. But I think it's good to chat.
It is good to chat. And just to remind our listeners, do go and have a look at Jose's very, very well articulated article about immigrants and refugees and asylum seekers. It's a cracker. Peter, have a gorgeous weekend.
Thanks very much.
Jose and I are still waiting for our blackberry and apple crumble, but we won't keep nagging you.
Well, I made an apple crumble for my brother and his wife this weekend, which they really enjoyed. Oh, fantastic! And I didn't even follow a recipe; I just threw the apples in. I'm very proud of myself on that front. And there's still some of it left in the fridge. If you were, I could post you some.
I'm not having leftovers, Peter. I want one dedicatedly made for me.
Well, you'll have to come and see me, and we'll have to do one of these things in face to face, and I'll cook the crumble.
Okay.
Very good.
All right
then.
Bye, Peter.
Yeah.
Bye,
See ya.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.